Why Ken Paxton was acquitted. Texas Republicans in Austin risk becoming the Albany Democrats. One-party dominance in a democracy means the main political debates occur in the ruling party, including personal political feuds. That explains the overwhelming decision by Republicans in the Texas State Senate on Saturday to acquit Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on 16 articles of impeachment filed by the Republican Texas House. Mr. Paxton's defenders are spinning that he was saved by a populist national conservative groundswell to put an end to the Bush era in Texas. What a joke. There is no longer a Bush era in Texas or anywhere else. George P. Bush, Jeb Bush's son, lost to Mr. Paxton in the 2022 primary for AG. What really happened Saturday is that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who runs the state Senate, chose to rescue Mr. Paxton in a rebuke to his rival, House Speaker Dade Phelan. All politics is very local here. We wrote at the beginning of the Senate trial that Mr. Patrick looked like he might examine the evidence with an open mind. He had kept quiet during the House debate. But we were wrong. It's now obvious the fix was in from the start and that Mr. Patrick lobbied his fellow GOP senators to unite against the House articles of impeachment. Only 2 GOP senators voted to convict Mr. Paxton, and one of them is 78-year-old Robert Nichols, an independent-minded committee chairman. Mr. Patrick's bias was on display immediately after the Senate trial ended when he blamed it all in highly personal fashion on Mr. Phelan. The Speaker and his team rammed through the first impeachment of a statewide elected official in Texas in over 100 years while paying no attention to the precedent, Mr. Patrick said. He added that the impeachment should never have happened and that he would move to rewrite the state constitution so it doesn't happen like this again. Mr. Patrick also went on the attack against Mr. Phelan, calling for a full audit of all taxpayer money spent by the House from the beginning of their investigation in March to today. It's revealing that Mr. Patrick's statement dealt entirely with the impeachment process, not with Mr. Paxton's behavior. The Texas House impeachment did happen relatively fast, but it came after months of investigation and with compelling evidence. Mr. Paxton triggered the probe by seeking $3.3 million from the legislature to settle a lawsuit brought by whistleblowers on his staff alarmed by Mr. Paxton's dealings with real estate developer and campaign donor Nate Paul. The House voted 121 to 23 in favor of impeachment, with 60 Republicans in the majority. The acquittal is perhaps a satisfying victory for Mr. Patrick over his House rival, but it may not play out so well for Texas Republicans in the longer run. A federal investigation into Mr. Paxton is continuing amid reports that a grand jury has been impaneled. One-party rule has often led to abuses of unchecked power and corruption in U.S. state governments, as we've learned in Albany, Springfield and Trenton. If voters draw that lesson from Mr. Paxton's acquittal, the GOP's political dominance could be in jeopardy as Texas demographics change. Texas voters still lean right, but evidence of corruption can overcome ideology when the party in power dismisses it as unimportant. A precedent worth noting is when lobbyist Jack Abramoff and aides to then-Majority Leader Tom DeLay abused their power. Mr. DeLay was never charged, but the scandal helped Democrats retake the House majority in 2006. Texas Republicans do not want to become the conservative version of Albany Democrats. Why Ken Paxton was acquitted. Texas Republicans in Austin risk becoming the Albany Democrats. One-party dominance in a democracy means the main political debates occur in the ruling party, including personal political feuds. That explains the overwhelming decision by Republicans in the Texas State Senate on Saturday to acquit Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton on 16 articles of impeachment filed by the Republican Texas House. Vivek Ramaswamy wasn't in Model UN, but he's got that Power Del vibe. As the GOP presidential candidates begin to tussle, some former teenage diplomats see a familiar archetype, the guy who tosses bombs into foreign policy debates. You know the type, viscerally, from your high school years. The guy who proposes a land invasion of Russia in the wintertime. Head tank nuclear disarmament talks if the room won't go along with the uranium disposal plan he pulled from a random academic paper found in obscure JSTOR corners. Perhaps you'd forgotten about him, a certain Model United Nations delegate. When Ukraine's war with Russia came up in Fox News' August 23 GOP presidential primary debate, former kid diplomats found themselves back in the unsettling realm of their adolescent foreign policy debates, of strong egos in ill-fitting suits. When moderator Brett Baer asked the candidates if they'd oppose sending more money to bolster Ukraine's defense forces, businessman Vivek Ramaswamy was the only one to raise his hand high in the air. The audience erupted in applause. "I find it offensive," Ramaswamy said, "that we have professional politicians on this stage that would make a pilgrimage to Kiev, to their Pope, Zelensky, without doing the same thing for people in Maui, or the south side of Chicago, or the Philadelphia neighborhood of Kensington." Some of the professional politicians, like former Vice President Mike Pence, tried to dig into Ramaswamy by invoking what they saw as a holy Reagan-era doctrine of sending money to foreign rebels fighting communist leaders. Ramaswamy's mouth curved into a smug frown. "I have a news flash," he shot back, "the USSR does not exist anymore." Cheers in the arena. Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's former ambassador to the United Nations, countered with her own version of a crash course in containing Russia with aid to Ukraine, wearing the face of a disappointed professor as she shook her head. "Nikki, I wish you well on your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon," Ramaswamy said, referring to two large military contractors. "Oh," thought anyone watching who once survived the Model UN scene. "We know him." Santiago Mayer, 21, recalled moments from his not-so-distant past. He's the executive director of Voters of Tomorrow, a left-aligned group focused on young voters. Watching from the group's DC office, he saw a familiar character in Ramaswamy had seen at the many Model UN conferences he attended throughout high school. He remembered that pesky Egyptian delegate at a Mexico City conference eagerly disrupting discussions on space weaponry, as if Egypt had ever put more than a few satellites in orbit. "All of us are sort of annoying in the sense that we're so passionate about foreign relationships, like, I have a foreign policy magazine subscription," Mayer says. "But when you reach that level, where you're actually just pretending to be an expert when the former ambassador to the United Nations is standing right next to you, that is just next level." That was Haley's retort to Ramaswamy: "You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows." Who knows why 14- and 15-year-olds with no foreign policy experience devote 8+ years to debating these issues? The romantic explanation: escapism and wish-casting for a better world. The cynical explanation is pre-professional resume padding and ego-feeding. Being subjectively crowned best delegate can be addictive. In the taxonomy of this subculture, two broad archetypes emerge. One kind is the future alphabet bureaucrats and Capitol Hill flax and Langley cloistered analysts, who see in Model UN an outlet for their Westphalian passions. The other kind are known in these circles, somewhat derogatorily, as power dells. The label, former model owners agree, can ruin reputations. Power dells tend to filibuster, scramble the diplomatic board and bulldoze over group consensus. Which is what some, liberals in particular, see in Ramaswamy. For the Trump version of the Republican Party today that often puts a premium on the dominating alpha male archetype, he fit that mold pretty well, says Ryan Shea, a D.C. lobbyist who has worked in legislative affairs for sundry Democratic lawmakers. Shea's most memorable run-in with a power dell? Food insecurity talks, like 15 years ago. Both types of Model UN formers can end up in D.C., in Democratic press shops or the State Department, or as a character in the Russiagate saga. "There's a specific type of energy that I think a lot of us recognize," says one former Ohio State University Model UN delegate, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because, well, she takes her job in D.C. politics seriously.